Joined for the latest in our series of weekly conversations with Chris Vanderveen, 9 News Director of Reporting, and our lead on our COVID-19 reporting. Chris, the focus this week is the vaccine schedule in Colorado. Things seem to have stabilized a bit in the sense that people aren't do-si-doing all over the dance floor in terms of their order. It's just a matter of getting vaccines to Coloradans. How are we doing?
Good, not great, Kyle. I think that's really the assessment of where Colorado is right now. If you look at where Colorado is compared to other states, we're doing pretty well. And I think the governor likes to rely on where Colorado is in other states, and really that's a fair assessment of where the state is right now. But when you look at just simply where Colorado is and where Colorado needs to be, it's still rather daunting, and not much has changed over the last week. There is more vaccine going to more places, but as we've been reporting for the last week or so, there really is this holdup in certain people that are in that 1A that really need to get vaccinated, and they're just not getting vaccinated yet. That was a story a week ago. It's gotten better now, but there's still more progress to be made.
Yeah, fair to look at how we're doing versus other states, but that reminds me of Colorado's relatively low education funding. You know, better than Mississippi is not a particularly impressive slogan or strategy. When we talk about the percentage of Coloradans who are vaccinated and it creeps up through the single digits, it occurs to me that maybe we ought to be lending the perspective that that's not a number that we're ever going to get to 100, nor is that the plan. I mean, just take folks who are 16 and younger. They can't get the vaccine now if they wanted it. So those people aren't going to be in that equation.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to see from the state is that in any given age category, and now right now it's really the focus is on 70 and above, is that you get 70%, 80% of that group to sort of buy in to get the vaccine. And at that level, there is general acceptance within the scientific community that you'll have essentially effective herd immunity that's really going to slow down the spread dramatically. But as we've talked about before, keep in mind, if you get 70% of the people who are 70 and older to buy in and get a vaccine, really you start to wipe away the primary concern in terms of people who are ending up in the hospital, people that are getting primarily the most sick, and the people who are most dying. So you start to take that chunk away. You've already done a lot of work, really the hardest part of the work. And when you start to get people who are in that sort of 18 to 70 range, then you have another chunk. But again, they're less inclined to get more sick. So really the heavy duty work, and really why it's so necessary to be done quickly right now, is that you've got the most vulnerable group on the front end. And the longer that takes, the more vulnerable they're going to be for a prolonged period of time, which may not be necessary.
That's a good way to think about it, Chris. I'm not sure that I had thought about it in exactly that way. Obviously, we have these priority groups, but it's almost like every vaccination we're able to give to somebody now should be worth a lot more points than the vaccinations that we give at the end of the line, just in terms of their importance to the effort.
Yeah, think about it. These are people who are more inclined to be hospitalized, and once hospitalized, they're more likely to die from it because of it. So you've got to get rid of the danger on that. And once you get rid of that, I think really the dynamic of this debate really shifts. Sure, would I like to get a vaccine tomorrow? Sure. Is it going to happen? Absolutely not. And I'm back in the sort of the June category, but I'm less of a priority. I think where this becomes a little tricky, Kyle, is when you start to talk about teachers. There are people who are essentially frontline educators that aren't going to be vaccinated until March right now. And that's a problem when you have schools that are opening up and kids that are going back into schools. What does this mean for them? I don't think we know just yet. And we've had this giant experiment, this social experiment, for the last year, essentially. And we're now going to see what happens when you get the 70 and plus vaccinated, but yet you don't have people who are dealing with kids in schools get vaccinated. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Chris knows this, but there's a 35-year-old joke in the 9 newsroom that predates either of our appearances in the newsroom, but it was back when 9 News moved down the street. Chris is chuckling because he knows the story. That 9 News moved from Bannock Street to our current location on Spear Street, and the joke from the old-timers was everything will be fixed and it'll be better in the new building. This idea that, well, just as soon as we hit this milestone, everything's going to be good. 30 years later, people at 9 News are still making the joke, it'll all be fixed when we're in the new building. It reminds me, though, the way that some people talk about the incoming Biden administration. There's clearly this hope and expectation that there's going to be a switch flipped when Biden takes office. He's going to release the second doses of the vaccines, and that's going to help, and the approach is going to change. Based on your reading, is that a fair hope?
Well, clearly, I think the approach is going to shift, and the federal response is going to shift. But you're also dealing with everything that's built up to this moment, and a lot of that has been imperfect, particularly when it comes to the vaccine rollout. It just hasn't gone as effective as I think a lot of people would like to see. And when there's an inauguration next week, things don't just shift. It's going to take many, many weeks for it to sort of ramp up. And the Biden administration is still going to be dealing with the same difficulties that the Trump administration has been dealing with. You don't have enough supply, and you have very high demand. And because it's just going to take time. It's going to take weeks. It's going to take months. And the process is going to go in fits and starts. That's not going to end next week.
You know, and maybe this is just a bookmark to pick up our next conversation, Chris, because I know we're coming up on the end of our time. But one thing that you have been great about pointing out to the public is this vaccine mess. It's not like we didn't know this was coming. We knew that a vaccine was in the pipeline. We knew who was going to need it, how quickly this was going to happen. So this, gee whiz, like this is all happening so fast. We knew it was coming. I wonder what we should be bookmarking for next year at this time. Because obviously there's going to be a need to adjust the vaccine year by year to get it out to people in a reasonable manner. And there are going to be more milestones and benchmarks that come up. And it would be wonderful if we stopped being so shocked about these things that we've had 6 to 9 months warning on.
I hope we use the lessons of the last year and sort of remind ourselves that this was very much imperfect. There were a lot of problems associated with the rollout of the testing in March and April of last year, and now with the rollout of the vaccine. And I hope a year from now, we're actually able to have an honest assessment of what went wrong. Let's hope that the vaccine is there, the vaccine is proving effective, the variants aren't sort of bypassing the effectiveness of the vaccine, and then we can sort of say, where did we mess up? What do we need to do right the next time? Because there will be a next time. There's going to be more virus that comes out, other issues that pop up. And just as when this country deals with a hurricane, when we dealt with Katrina, for example, and we sort of take a look, well, we can't do that again. And I think the problem has been is that this country historically doesn't do a really great job of learning from the mistakes of the past. So we said after Katrina that we were going to do all these things to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And you realize, well, we didn't really do much. And hopefully a year from now, we sort of take a look at what we've done. We have an honest assessment of what went wrong. Let's take some of the politics out of it and say this is where we really blew it, and then make sure that we implement that. And I think from a public health perspective, what we realized in the last 9 months is that our public health system is not great. In fact, for the most part, it's not good. And it's not because it's run by people who are grotesquely ineffective at their jobs. It's because the system is not efficient. And we're seeing that right now in Colorado in terms of how the vaccine rolls out. And hopefully we can take a look and sort of assess where we are in public health and realize that we're going to have to put some more resources into it to prevent the mess that we've seen over the last 9 months.
Shore up those levees, because as we all know, a 1 in 100-year storm doesn't just happen once a century. It's just a probability thing, and there's no telling that we're going to wait another 100 years for a pandemic like this. Chris, appreciate your time. We'll talk again next week.
You bet.